My name is Leah, and until I turned 26, my entire life was a lie. While I was struggling to pay off $60,000 in student loans and working a dead-end job, my parents were hiding a secret. My grandfather had left me an inheritance of over $2 million. They called it protection, but it was a cage. They watched me struggle. They controlled every decision, all while using my money to cover their own shameful secrets. This is the story of how I unearthed the truth and dismantled my family to get my life back. Before I share the rest of my story, drop where you're watching from in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you've ever had to go above and beyond for family. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. The candles on my 26th birthday cake flickered like warning signals I couldn't read. We sat in Mistral, one of those back bay restaurants where the waiters know your name and the wine costs more than most people's rent. My parents had insisted on this place, just like they insisted on everything else in my life. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Mom said, her diamond earrings catching the light. Caroline Chambers never did anything halfway, not her jewelry, not her real estate deals, and certainly not her control over her children. I closed my eyes and wished for what I always wished for: freedom. The kind my grandfather promised me before the stroke took his words away. Remember when Grandpa said he'd get me that teal BMW for my 24th birthday? The words tumbled out as I opened my eyes, watching the smoke curl up from the extinguished candles. Wonder where that dream car ended up. It was meant to be a throwaway comment, a bittersweet memory of Professor Elias Vance and his grand promises. But the temperature at our table dropped 10 degrees. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom's smile froze like January ice on the Charles River. They exchanged a look, quick, panicked, the kind parents share when their kid asks where babies come from at Thanksgiving dinner. "Your grandfather was always making jokes like that, Leah," Dad said, forcing a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. "You know how he loved his stories." But I knew my grandfather. He taught literature at Harvard for 40 years, and he never said anything he didn't mean. His words were as precise as his lesson plans. "It wasn't a joke," I said quietly. "He showed me the brochure. We picked out the color together." Mom reached across the table, her manicured hand covering mine. "Sweetheart, you were going through such a hard time then. Maybe you're remembering it differently." The hard time. That's what they called my rejection from MIT's architecture program. The interview that got mysteriously canceled at the last minute. The dream that died before it could breathe. I pulled my hand away. "My memory's fine." The rest of dinner passed in careful conversation about safe topics: the weather, my dead-end graphic design job, Evan's new apartment. But I couldn't shake the image of their faces in that moment of naked panic. After 2 years of grief over losing Grandpa, I'd never seen them look afraid. That night, in my cramped studio apartment, the one they'd found for me in a building they approved of with rent they supplemented, I lay awake replaying the scene. My parents controlled everything: my job, my apartment, my social circle. They called it love. They called it protection. But that look on their faces? That was fear. And for the first time in my sheltered, suffocating life, I wondered what Richard and Caroline Chambers had to be afraid of. The morning after my birthday, I woke with questions buzzing in my head like angry wasps. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen and stared at the family photo on my refrigerator. All of us at Grandpa's house by the lake, his arm around me, that conspiratorial smile he saved just for his granddaughter. I started making a list. All the things that never quite added up. The MIT interview, canceled an hour before I was supposed to leave. Technical difficulties, they'd said. But when I called back, they had no record of my application at all. The job at Morrison Design Group, Dad's golf buddy owned it. "You're so lucky," everyone said. 3 years later, I was still making coffee and fixing other people's mistakes. The apartment in Brookline, Mom found it in 2 days. "Perfect timing," she'd said. The lease had my name, but the checks came from their account, the boyfriend who'd dumped me senior year. "He wasn't good enough for you anyway," Mom had said. Years later, I found out his father's company had suddenly landed a huge contract with Dad's firm. The timing was interesting. My hands shook as I opened the closet and pulled out the cardboard box labeled college stuff. Somewhere in this mess was evidence that I wasn't crazy, that Grandpa's promise had been real. I found my student loan paperwork first. $60,000 at 11% interest. I'd been paying for 5 years and barely made a dent. Mom had said federal loans were too complicated and steered me toward this private lender. Another family friend, of course. Then, buried under old textbooks and graduation programs, I found it. A crumpled certified mail notice from 2 years ago. Right after Grandpa died. I remembered now. I'd been too grief-stricken to care about mail. The notice showed someone had signed for the package. The signature was illegible, but it wasn't mine. My phone rang. Mom, hi sweetheart, Dad and I were thinking about brunch on Sunday, that new place in Cambridge? Can't, I'm busy. Silence. I never said no to them. Busy with what? Her voice had an edge now, sharp as winter wind. Just things, Mom, I'll call you later. I hung up before she could interrogate me further. My heart hammered against my ribs. Such a small rebellion, but it felt like revolution. The return address on the certified mail notice was for a law firm. Finley and Associates, Beacon Hill. I'd never heard of them, but Grandpa had lived in Boston his whole life. He must have known every lawyer in the city. I dressed carefully. My best blazer, the one Mom bought me for job interviews I'd never had. If I was going to start looking for answers, I might as well look the part. As I left my apartment, I noticed a black Lexus parked across the street. It had been there yesterday too. Probably nothing. This was Brookline after all. Everyone drove expensive cars. But as I walked to the T-station, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that my small act of defiance had already been noted. The game was changing, and I didn't even know the rules. The law office of Arthur Finley occupied the second floor of a brownstone that had seen better centuries. The stairs creaked under my feet, and the hallway smelled like old books and older secrets. This was as far from my father's glass and chrome office building as you could get while staying in Boston. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been there since the Revolutionary War, barely glanced up. Mr. Finley doesn't see anyone without an appointment. Please. I placed the certified mail notice on her desk. Tell him it's about Professor Elias Vance. Tell him his granddaughter is here. Her eyes sharpened behind her thick glasses. Without a word, she picked up an ancient phone and murmured something I couldn't catch. Then, he'll see you now. Arthur Finley looked like a character from one of Grandpa's beloved novels. Silver-haired, wearing a 3-piece suit that had been expensive 30 years ago. His office was all leather and mahogany, every surface covered with papers and books. Leah, he said my name like a sigh. You look just like him, same stubborn chin. You knew my grandfather? Knew him? I was his lawyer for 40 years, until he stopped, studying me with eyes that had seen too much. What brings you here now? I showed him the mail notice. His face went through several expressions before settling on something between sadness and anger. I wondered when you'd come, he said finally. I'm surprised it took this long. What do you mean? He walked to a filing cabinet that looked older than the building itself. After some rummaging, he pulled out a thick folder. Your grandfather was my friend, more than a client. He knew what your parents were like. That's why he came to me instead of using the family lawyers. Family lawyers? I thought of Henderson and Associates, where Dad played golf with the partners. Your grandfather didn't trust them, or your parents, if I'm being honest. He set the folder on the desk between us. He was particularly worried after his first stroke, said your parents were already making plans for his money. My stomach turned to ice. What kind of plans? The kind that didn't include you getting what was rightfully yours. He opened the folder, revealing documents covered in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Elias set up a trust fund for you. A substantial one. The papers were in that certified mail. Which someone else signed for. Your parents, I'd imagine, though proving it would be difficult. I thought of all the times they'd told me we couldn't afford things. How they'd insisted I take out those crushing student loans. How every penny in my life came with strings attached. How much? My voice came out as a whisper. The initial trust was for $2 million, plus the house by the lake, plus various investments that would have matured by now. $2 million. While I'd been counting pennies and eating ramen, they'd stolen $2 million. But that's not all, Finley continued, his voice gentle like he was defusing a bomb. Your grandfather was paranoid. Justifiably, it turns out. He set up a second trust, one your parents don't know about. A second trust? He called it his insurance policy. Said if something happened to the first trust, you'd still have a way to fight back. He pulled out another document. This one is under my control. Your parents can't touch it. It's not as much, about 300,000, but it's yours, if you want it. I stared at the papers, trying to process this reversal of fortune. Why didn't you contact me? I tried, Finley said, pain flickering across his weathered face. After Elias passed, I sent the certified mail. When you didn't respond, I called your parents' house. Your mother said you were too distraught that you'd asked them to handle everything. Then their lawyers sent me a cease and desist letter. They did what? Claimed I was harassing the family during a time of grief. He pulled out the letter, Henderson and Associates letterhead bold across the top. I'm 78 years old, Leah. I couldn't fight the entire Boston legal establishment, but I kept everything, waited, hoped you'd find your way here eventually. My phone buzzed. Mom again, then Dad, then Evan. I turned it off. Your grandfather mentioned something about a safe, Finley continued, at the lake house. Said if anything happened, you should look behind the painting of the lake at sunset. The painting I'd helped him hang when I was 16. We'd argued about whether it was straight for 20 minutes, both of us perfectionists in our own way. I need to go there, I said. Be careful. If your parents suspect what you're doing, what can they do? They've already stolen everything. His expression told me I was being naive. People do desperate things when cornered, Leah. Take someone with you. I thought of Jenna, my only friend who wasn't somehow connected to my parents' social circle. We'd met at a terrible work mixer and bonded over our mutual hatred of networking. She worked in financial forensics. Perfect. The drive to New Hampshire took 3 hours. Jenna spent most of it alternating between disbelief and rage on my behalf. $2 million? She kept saying, your parents stole $2 million and then made you feel guilty for needing help with rent? The lake house stood exactly as I remembered, a modest cabin that Grandpa had refused to renovate despite Mom's constant suggestions. The key was still under the painted rock shaped like a turtle. Inside, everything smelled like him, pipe tobacco and old books. The painting hung where it always had, slightly crooked despite our best efforts. My hands trembled as I lifted it off the wall. The safe was there, built into the wall itself. The combination came to me instantly. My birthday, not the year I was born, but the year he'd taught me to swim in this very lake. Inside the safe I found legal documents for the original trust, detailed and damning bank statements showing regular deposits to accounts I'd never seen. A handwritten letter in Grandpa's careful script, a safety deposit box key taped to an envelope. But it was the letter that broke me. I sat on his old couch, Jenna beside me, and read. My dearest Leah, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I'm sorry. I should have been braver, should have confronted them while I was alive. But I was a coward, afraid of destroying the family, afraid of leaving you alone in the chaos. Your parents love you, in their broken way. But they love control more. They've been planning to use your trust fund to cover their bad investments since before I had my first stroke. I've watched them circle like vultures, and I've prepared accordingly. The second trust Arthur holds is your weapon. Use it to hire lawyers, to fight, to reclaim what's yours. But more importantly, use it to build the life you want. The life they've been preventing you from living. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred with tears. Jenna took the letter, reading the rest aloud. There's more, sweetheart. Check the deposit box at Boston Private. Box 1847. Everything you need is there. And remember, you're stronger than you know. You have my stubborn streak and your grandmother's courage. Use them both. All my love, Grandpa. Jenna drove us back to Boston that night. I couldn't stop shaking. The next morning, we went to Boston Private together. The box contained more evidence. Emails between my parents and their lawyer discussing how to redirect my trust fund. Photos of documents with forged signatures. Even a recording on an old USB drive. Grandpa had been thorough. This is enough to bury them, Jenna said after reviewing everything. Criminal charges, not just civil. I knew I had to confront them, but first, I needed to move out of the apartment they controlled. Jenna helped me pack that night, and by morning, I was sleeping on her couch in Cambridge. Free for the first time in my adult life. The confrontation came at their house in Wellesley. I'd texted them that I was coming for Sunday dinner, like nothing had changed. They probably thought I'd gotten over my little rebellion. I waited until after the main course. Then I placed a copy of the trust documents on their pristine dining table. "I know what you did," I said simply. Mom's face went white. Dad's turned red. "Now, sweetheart," Mom started, reaching for me. "Don't." I pulled back. "Don't you dare call me sweetheart. You stole $2 million from me. You sabotaged my education, my career, my entire life. And for what? To cover Dad's bad investments?" "You don't understand," Dad said, his CEO voice kicking in. "That money was meant for the family. We were protecting it. By taking out loans in my name? By letting me work a dead-end job while sitting on my inheritance? By controlling every aspect of my life so I wouldn't find out? We gave you everything." Mom's composure finally cracked. "The best schools, the best opportunities." "The best cage," I interrupted, "lined with lies." That's when Evan walked in, my younger brother, the golden child who'd gotten everything handed to him, except he looked terrible, hollow-eyed, nervous. "Leah," he said, "please don't do this." Something in his voice made me look closer. "What did you do, Evan?" The truth came out in pieces. Evan's gambling debts, the forged power of attorney documents, the fact that my trust fund hadn't just been stolen, it had been emptied to pay off his bookies. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "All of it," he whispered. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because what else could I do? My entire family had conspired to rob me, and they were sitting here trying to make me feel guilty for discovering it. "I'm filing charges tomorrow," I said, standing up. "Criminal charges. Arthur Finley is representing me." "You can't." Mom stood too, desperation cracking her perfect facade. "We're your family." "No," I said, walking toward the door. "Family doesn't do this. Family protects each other. You protected yourselves." Dad tried one last time. "We have lawyers too, Leah, the best in Boston. You can't win this." I turned at the doorway. "Grandpa thought I could, and between his opinion and yours, I'll take his." The next 6 months were war. My parents hired Cromwell and Associates, known for destroying opponents in court. They tried everything, claiming I was mentally unstable, that Grandpa had dementia, that the signatures were real. They even suggested I'd manipulated a dying old man. But Finley had been preparing for this fight for 2 years. Every document was authenticated, every piece of evidence backed up by 2 more. And then there was Evan. My brother cracked under the pressure. The prosecution offered him a deal: testify truthfully and avoid jail time. He took it. The day Evan took the stand, our parents sat rigid as marble statues. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, this golden boy who'd always gotten everything he wanted. "Tell us about the power of attorney documents," Finley said gently. Evan's voice shook. "Dad said Leah wouldn't understand, that she was too naive to handle that much money. They needed me to forge her signature." "And why did you agree?" "Because I owed money, a lot of money, to the kind of people who break legs." He couldn't look at me. "Dad said the trust fund could cover it, that Leah would never know." "How much money?" $800,000. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even I hadn't known it was that much. "And the rest of the trust fund?" Dad's real estate deals had gone bad. Mom's boutique was hemorrhaging money. They'd been using Leah's trust fund as collateral for years, moving money around hoping to pay it back before she found out. The prosecutor took over. "Mr. Chambers, did your parents explicitly tell you to forge your sister's signature?" "Yes." "Did they know the money would be used for gambling debts?" "Yes." "Did they ever intend to tell Leah the truth?" Evan finally looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "No. They said she was better off not knowing, that they were protecting her from the burden." When Mom took the stand, she tried to maintain her composure. But Finley had emails, recorded conversations, bank records, each piece of evidence chipped away at her facade until she sat there, exposed as the manipulator she'd always been. "We loved her too much," she kept saying. "We just wanted to protect her." From her own money? Finley asked. From her own choices? From her own life? The killing blow came when Finley read Grandpa's letter aloud. When he reached the line about letting me fly instead of breaking my wings, Mom broke down completely. Her sobs echoed through the courtroom, but I felt nothing. She wasn't crying for what she'd done to me. She was crying because she'd been caught. Dad didn't even try to defend himself. His testimony was all legal maneuvering, attempting to minimize criminal liability. The CEO to the end, calculating losses and cutting his losses. The judge's decision was swift and brutal. Full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest and penalties. Criminal fraud charges for my parents. Probation for Evan, conditional on him attending gambling addiction treatment. As we left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. The mighty Chambers family, pillars of Boston society, had fallen. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. "You did the right thing," Finley assured me. "Had I? I'd destroyed my family. Even if they'd destroyed me first." The money came through faster than expected. Suddenly I had more in my bank account than I'd ever dreamed of. But I also had no family. Mom and Dad's assets were frozen pending criminal proceedings. Their friends, my supposed family friends, vanished like smoke. I quit my job at Morrison Design. My boss seemed relieved. I'd never really belonged there anyway. The girl who got hired as a favor, who fetched coffee and fixed margins while dreams of architecture withered inside me. The lake house became my refuge. I moved there in the fall, when the leaves blazed orange and gold around the water. The first few weeks I mostly slept. Trauma, my therapist said, exhaustion from years of gaslighting and control. Jenna visited every weekend, bringing groceries and gossip from the real world. She was the only person who didn't look at me with pity or judgment. "You could travel?" she suggested one evening, wine glasses in hand as we watched the sunset. "See the world. Do all the things they never let you do." But I didn't want to run. I wanted to build. I started small, sketching designs at Grandpa's old desk, reading architecture books he'd saved for me. I applied to Harvard's Graduate School of Design, not MIT. That dream felt too tainted now. When the acceptance letter came, I cried for the first time since the trial. Evan wrote to me in December. A real letter, handwritten, postmarked from the rehabilitation facility. "Leah, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I see it now. How they shaped me into their weapon against you. How they used my weaknesses and your strength against us both. I'm getting help. Real help. Not the kind where Dad writes a check and the problem disappears, but the kind where I have to face what I've done. I don't expect you to write back. I just needed you to know that I finally understand why Grandpa loved you best. You were the only one of us who was real. Your brother, if I can still call myself that. Evan." I didn't write back, not then. But I kept the letter. Winter at the lake was brutal and beautiful. I learned to keep the wood stove burning, to navigate icy roads, to be alone without being lonely. I designed dream houses that no one would ever build. Practiced being creative without permission. In February, I got another letter. This one broke me completely. It was from Mom, 10 pages of her perfect handwriting. Not excuses this time, but memories. Stories about her own mother, who'd controlled her the same way. About how she'd sworn she'd be different, then found herself repeating the pattern. About the fear that consumed her when she realized I was stronger than she'd ever been. "I broke your wings because mine were broken first." It's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I put the letter in a wooden box Grandpa had carved, along with Evan's. Not forgiveness, but not destruction either. Just safekeeping, until I figured out what to do with the broken pieces of us. Spring came slowly, ice melting into mud, buds appearing on trees I'd thought were dead. I started the renovation Grandpa had always talked about. Not Mom's version with marble and status, but something honest. Clean lines, big windows, space to breathe. 1 year later, I stood on the deck of my rebuilt lake house, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. My drafting table faced the window now, covered with plans for the community art center I was designing pro bono. My first real project as a licensed architect. The coffee was better than anything I'd made at Morrison Design. Small victories. "You're up early." Jenna emerged from the guest room wrapped in one of Grandpa's old flannel shirts. "Big meeting today," I reminded her. "The zoning board." She'd become more than a friend over the past year. We'd fallen into each other slowly, carefully, two people who'd learned not to trust easily. She still kept her apartment in Cambridge, but most of her clothes lived in my closet now. "You'll be brilliant," she said, kissing my shoulder. "You always are." I wasn't always brilliant. Some days I could barely get out of bed, crushed by the weight of what I'd lost and found. My therapist called it grief, not just for the family I'd had, but for the one I'd imagined having someday. The criminal trial had ended with my parents getting 2 years probation and massive fines. They'd lost their house, their business, their place in society. Last I heard, they were living in a small apartment in Worcester. I didn't visit. But Evan and I had started talking again, tentatively. He'd been sober for 8 months, working as a counselor at the same facility that had helped him. We met for coffee once a month, rebuilding something that might someday resemble brotherhood. "I need to tell you something," he'd said at our last meeting. "I'm getting married." The surprise must have shown on my face. "Her name's Sarah. We met in group therapy." He laughed nervously. "I know how that sounds, but she gets it. The family stuff, the addiction, all of it." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. "I want you to be there, at the wedding. I know it's a lot to ask." "I'll think about it." Now, standing on my deck, I had thought about it. The girl I'd been, controlled, diminished, caged, would have said, no. Too painful, too complicated. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I pulled out my phone and texted Evan, "I'll be there. Can I bring Jenna?" His response was immediate, "Of course. Thank you." Inside, I heard Jenna making breakfast, singing off-key to the radio. The plans for the arts center caught the morning light, pencil lines full of possibility. Somewhere in Boston, my parents were living with their choices. Somewhere else, my brother was learning to make better ones. And here, in the house my grandfather left me, I was finally building the life he'd always believed I could have. Not perfect, not without scars, but mine. The lake stretched out before me, calm and endless. I thought of Grandpa's letter, the one I knew by heart now. "You're stronger than you know." He was right. He'd always been right. I took a deep breath of pine-scented air and went inside to start my day. There were buildings to design, dreams to chase, wings to spread. The BMW could wait. I had everything I needed. My grandfather's true legacy wasn't the money, but the courage he left me to reclaim my life. The greatest lesson I learned is that you cannot build a future on a foundation of lies, not even for the people you love. Sometimes the most courageous act is to tear everything down in order to rebuild something real and true. True freedom isn't found in a cage, no matter how gilded. It's found in designing a life that is authentically, unapologetically your own. Thank you for watching, and never forget the strength you hold to spread your own wings.